What's up guys, hope you're having a good day. In this video we're going to be taking a deep dive into all of the UFC 312 main event fights from a betting perspective. Hopefully you'll be able to use the information in this video to make better betting decisions and maybe even earn some extra cash. All the information that I'll be sharing with you in this video is backed up by many hours of research and over 10 years of experience betting on the UFC. I have made a profit every single year betting on the UFC for the last 15 years, and 2025 will be no different. So if you want to jump on board, make some money betting on the UFC too, come join my community, check me out. UFC live betting is my speciality. You may think you might not be able to tail someone's live bets, but you know, come join our community and you'll see that it's an absolute money train. We actually make a profit on just under 70% of UFC events. I think the exact percentage is something like 68.7% of events over the last 8 years. So jump on board. This is a great time to join since we've just had this little dip. And as you can see in the past, whenever we have flat periods or dips, we always follow it up with huge winning runs. And you can kind of see we're in the middle of a very nice winning run at the moment. So come and join us. If you watch every UFC event live, you're basically getting paid to watch the UFC. We perform really well and you'll absolutely love it. Not only will you make a lot of money live betting with me, you'll also learn a lot about the UFC and betting on the sport. So come and check it out, links in the description below. Now let's move into breaking down the main event of this weekend's card, which is going to be a rematch between Dricus du Plessis and Strickland. So when I was planning out what I was going to say in this breakdown video yesterday, this was going to be quite a straightforward one for me because, you know, these two fought about a year ago and I don't personally feel either of them have changed all that much since their last fight. We may have seen a little bit of improvement in certain areas from both of them, but nothing too major. I think this weekend both guys are going to look very similar to how they did a year ago. And so with both guys looking roughly the same as they did a year ago, we know, based on their first fight, this matchup is likely to be super competitive because their first fight was razor close and it ended in a split decision. So du Plessis got his hand raised, the judges scored the split in favour of him, but we can see MMA media were very torn, as well as the judges on who won this fight. I personally feel Strickland won this fight, but it doesn't matter how I scored it at the end of the day. It only matters how the judges scored it. But what this basically tells us is, irrespective of who you think will win this weekend, this fight is likely to be razor close and in terms of probabilities very close to a coin flip. And so this breakdown for this fight was going to be very straightforward, and it was going to be one of those fights where I say, you know, this is an IQ test. Let the odds do the work for you. Don't overthink this one and just bet whoever is the underdog, who in this case is Strickland. Because if we take a look at the odds, you know, we can see du Plessis the favourite at average odds of about 1.48, which is going to be minus 208 for an implied probability of 68%. If we take a look at the odds on Strickland, he's around an average of 2.70, which is going to be plus 170 for an implied probability of 37%. So if we know this fight is likely to be razor close, just like their first one, there's no sense, no logic behind betting on du Plessis, because at odds of 1.58, if you bet $1,000 on du Plessis at odds of 1.48, you obviously only make $48, right? If you place the same bet on Strickland, odds of 2.70, you make $170 profit. So if someone came to you and they said, I'm going to flip a coin, and if it lands on heads, I'm going to give you $48. If it lands on tails, I'm going to give you sorry, got my numbers wrong. We're doing $1,000. So those would be the payouts, right? If someone came to you and they said, I'm going to flip a coin, and if it lands on heads, I'm going to give you $408. If it lands on tails, I'm going to give you $1,700. Would you like to pick heads or tails? Of course, you're going to pick tails because the payout is a lot better on, you know, the flip of a coin, which has equal probability. You know, if there was a 90% chance the coin would land on heads, of course you would take the $480 because you've got much more chance of winning. But when we've got roughly equal probabilities of the coin landing heads or tails, which I think we also have roughly equal probabilities of du Plessis or Strickland winning, based on their last fight a year ago being so close and competitive, you would be a bit of a fool not to bet the underdog. And that was how I was going to approach the breakdown for this fight. However, everything changed yesterday when, if we go to our MMA Discord, we start scrolling through. If you're watching on YouTube, links in the description below to join us. But yeah, there's been a lot of discussion today. It might actually be in the VIP chat. I think it is in the VIP chat. Okay, we keep scrolling. Who brought it up? Who brought it up? Oh, here we go. Okay, so yesterday, Profit at All Costs posted about this potential staph infection for Mr. Sean Strickland. And this looks very, very bad. Looks very, very, very bad. I think I said that it is literally the most staphiest staph infection I've ever seen. So usually when something like this happens, it's a bit inconclusive as to whether it's staph or not. We're not sure. We're kind of on the fence. But this looks, like I said, the staphiest, the most staphiest staph infection I've ever seen. Like, this looks like staph. You got the inflammation, the swelling around the hole in the middle. This looks pretty bad. And then we had Jedi Goodman post this image from the face-off today. So this definitely looks like staph. And what's really interesting when we have situations like this, and what's crazy about this is, I've been watching the UFC for 20 years. I can never remember a time in history where so many high-profile fights were affected by staph. We had the controversy with Sarukian on, one of the recent pay-per-views. There were speculation Dvalishvili had it in the Sean O'Malley fight. So many big fights at the moment are affected by a potential staph infection. Benoit Saint-Denis had it against Dustin Poirier. And I can never remember it being like that in history. Staph infections used to be quite rare in the UFC, and it's probably just short-term variants, but now they're affecting so many high-profile fights. We see it all the damn time. It's crazy. And what's even crazier to me about staph infections is when I talk about staph infections, people really misinterpret me and they don't understand the context of what I'm saying. So I'm a trend-based better, which means, I like to bet with the wind behind my back, momentum on my side. I like to be pushing a boulder down a mountain as opposed to up a mountain, right? If there's a trend which is going to play out 70% of the time, I would much prefer to try and find bets that move with the trend that wins 70% of the time, rather than trying to be contrarian and cherry pick the 30% of bets which go against the trend. And so what I can say to you about staph infections is, the vast majority of the time a fighter competes with a staph infection, they lose. And whenever I say this, people will run to my Discord or my DMs or leave a comment below and they'll hit me with the whataboutisms. What about this guy that had a staph infection and won? What about that time you said, you weren't going to bet on such and such guy because he had a staph infection, he ended up winning. You suck, you're a fraud, blah, 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 you're clueless. I get all this. Again, this is an IQ test. When people talk like that, it kind of highlights... Sorry about that, guys. There's a lot happening in crypto at the moment, and I've got alerts on to make sure we're staying safe in situations and making money. So anyway, what I was going to say was, when people come to me and they say, examples such as this, it is an IQ test at the end of the day. Because I'm not coming out here and I'm saying, fighters never win who have staph. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying fighters rarely win when they have staph. The trend heavily favours them underperforming and losing. So whenever a fighter does have staph, they're immediately off the table for me. I wouldn't bet them. And if anything, I look for opportunities to bet against them because I know they're going to lose the vast majority of the time. Everything that we do is probability based. And nothing we do has a 100% probability of hitting. So there's always going to be exceptions to the rule. And there's going to be, those situations where the trend gets defied and the least likely outcome wins. But the key to making money in this game, the key to being profitable long term, is consistency. And we know if we are consistent over the long term and we consistently align ourselves with profitable and predictable trends, over the long term we're going to make a lot of money. And so in this instance, it very much looks like Sean Strickland has a staph infection. That's going to affect his cardio in a big way. He's going to be on antibiotics. His body's going to be drained. His body's going to have been fighting a serious infection, a potentially life-threatening infection at times if untreated. And the antibiotics are going to wreak havoc on his metabolism, his energy levels, his immune system. So Strickland's not in a good place this weekend, and that dramatically increases the probability of Dricus du Plessis winning. For that reason, there's no way I would ever consider betting on Strickland this weekend, and I'm going to need to see something extremely special from him in live betting to consider pulling the trigger on him as well, because we know, Strickland's a cardio machine. He may do all right for 1, 2, maybe 3 rounds, but those 4th and 5th rounds are going to get really, really difficult for him with how depleted his body is likely to be fighting such a serious infection like staph. So if you are about to rush to my Discord or the comment section to say, what about this time you said that, and what about that time you said that, and the guy you said had staph end up winning, I get it. No trend is 100%. If you find a trend that is 100% foolproof and never loses, keep it to yourself. Don't tell anyone. You'll make a lot of money betting on that trend. No trend like that exists, but we know the vast majority of the time, if you have a staph infection, you will lose in a cage fight to the death. So we don't go near it. We don't put our money in danger. We don't fuck around. We pass. We live to fight another day. Every week, we've got darts matches to bet. We've got 12 to 14 to 15 UFC fights to bet. We've got hundreds of football matches to cherry pick strong betting positions from. We don't need to be fucking around betting guys with staph infections. There's just no need. Plenty more fish in the sea. So many more opportunities to make money in this game. We'll briefly cover how both guys match up from a stylistic point of view. But again, if you do want to bet this fight this weekend, you have to go du Plessis. I don't think the odds are particularly attractive. I'm not going to be betting him myself. I think he's far too big of a favourite personally. If he were up at like 1.6, 1.7, something like that, I would pull the trigger on du Plessis. But 1.48 doesn't get me excited just because of how competitive their first fight was, even though I do think du Plessis will win this weekend. So when we consider how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, first of all, let's talk about grappling. So Strickland's very difficult to hold down. We saw that in the first fight when du Plessis did take Strickland down a few times, but every time he did take Strickland down, he wasn't able to achieve very much, and Strickland within 30 to 40 seconds was able to stand up relatively easily. I would expect that to be the case again. Du Plessis showed phenomenal grappling control, a very strong heavy top game against Israel Adesanya. So if we start to see Strickland slow a little bit in the second half of the fight with that staph infection, I think that is the stage in the fight where you could see du Plessis kind of hold Strickland down on the ground for longer, control him a bit and beat him up. But in the first half of the fight, I would be surprised if du Plessis were able to achieve anything with his grappling control in this one. I think he's probably going to struggle to hold Strickland down. So when it comes to Strickland taking du Plessis down and holding du Plessis down, I don't see him having too much success with that because of how strong and physically imposing du Plessis is. But at the same time, we know Strickland never really uses grappling, never tries to take his opponents down. We've seen him fight, pure kickboxers like Alex Pereira and not try to take them down. We know what Strickland's going to do. He's going to come forward, try and take control of center of the octagon, and jab and teep kick du Plessis to death. That's what he always does. So this is most likely going to be a stand-up fight like their first one was, with du Plessis mixing up takedowns from here and there to try and steal rounds and confuse Strickland a little bit with his unpredictable attacks. So we know du Plessis, very low-level striker, very sloppy, doesn't move very well, slows down as fights wear on, is very bad defensively. But when you watch these two in their first fight, even though Strickland is by far the better defensively, and moves much better than du Plessis, is also a lot better defensively, what you really notice about these two is that Strickland doesn't really have the ability to hurt du Plessis. So if you go back and watch their first fight, du Plessis takes a lot of damage. He's busted up very bad. He's got a lot of swelling, a lot of cuts on his face from those jabs, but the damage that Strickland is doing to him is not really bothering him very much at all. So he's just kind of plodding forward, taking everything that Strickland throws at him. And yes, he's taking a lot of damage. Yes, he's eating a lot of jabs. But it's not really throwing du Plessis off his game very much. The total opposite is true with Strickland. Even though Strickland outstruck du Plessis in the first fight in terms of volume and inflicted more significant damage, if you take the cut from the headbutt out of the equation, when du Plessis would land on Strickland, he would land hard and impactful strikes, which would kind of knock Strickland back, and you could see the power would really, really bother Strickland. Du Plessis' power is a big problem for Strickland. He doesn't like it. He doesn't like being hit by him. And essentially, du Plessis can just walk Strickland down and impose himself. With the potential staph infection for Strickland, he's likely to be even weaker, likely to have even less power in his hands and popping his shots, especially with one of his arms, his left arm, having the staph infection. Perhaps that arm is weakened or a little bit sore. And so I just see du Plessis kind of walking Strickland down, landing the harder, more damaging shots, putting Strickland on the back foot, nicking rounds with takedowns, probably wearing him out a bit with his constant pressure. And the staph infection is probably going to be the difference here, and du Plessis is probably going to win. So in terms of the over-under on this one, both guys are tough, both guys are well-rounded. Their first fight didn't even come close to being stopped. So very likely this one goes to a decision. I'm not going to be betting that myself. All I would say is, if you do want to bet the over-under on this fight, keep the potential staph infection in mind, because that could really change things and could lead to Strickland maybe gassing out and not being able to defend himself, or quitting if put in a bad position. And this fight is, I think this fight with the potential staph is a lot less likely to go to a decision than their first fight, but it probably will still go to a decision anyway. In terms of the props, I think the most likely outcome on this one is du Plessis by decision, and I wouldn't go for anything else. If you do want to bet a prop on this, I would go du Plessis by decision, but the odds in percentage terms aren't a whole lot better than du Plessis moneyline. So I hope you found that breakdown useful. Now let's move on to the co-main event. So now let's break down the co-main event on this card, which is a title fight between Weili Zhang and Tatiana Suarez. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that both these girls are in the even money odds range, and this is a very, very interesting fight. This is one of those fights that is absolutely amazing for live betting, because we know so much about both girls. The fight lasts 25 minutes, and they're both pretty well matched. So while there are some unanswered questions as to how this one's likely to go pre-fight, this is a matchup that I think there's a very good chance we'll be able to make money on in live betting. So if you're not in the live betting group, like I say, we make a profit on just under 70% of events. You should seriously consider joining us, because essentially if you watch every UFC event live, you're basically getting paid to watch the UFC. This fight is a great example of a fight where I know we're going to have an absolutely massive edge. So if you shop around, you can bet both girls at pretty much the same odds, but we can see Suarez is a slight favourite on most sites at average odds of about 1.88, which is going to be minus 114 for an implied probability of 53%. If we take a look at the odds on Weili Zhang, she's around an average, we'll call it a little bit better, at odds of about 1.91, which is going to be minus 110 for an implied probability of 52%. So Zhang's 35 years old, 5'4" with a 63-inch reach. Suarez, 34 years old, 5'5" with a 66-inch reach. So we can see both girls pretty much the same age. We can see that Suarez is a little bit longer and taller, and while that does make her choking game very dangerous, she's got thin, skinny arms that she can use to thread those forearms underneath the neck of her opponents and choke them out. We've seen her do that many times in the UFC. But what she gives up in her lean physique, or what she gains in her lean physique, I should say, she does give up when it comes to physicality. And I'll show you some footage in a little bit to illustrate what I'm talking about. Of course, even though Zhang's slightly shorter reach as well, she's very physically imposing, very strong, very athletic. And there are obviously strengths and weaknesses of that body type, which we'll also go into. So Zhang's a very well-rounded fighter, big knockout power, decent striking, reasonably good grappling, whereas Suarez is very much a specialist. She used to be on the United States Olympic wrestling team, so very high-level grappler from a technical point of view, but as we know, coming from a traditional wrestling background doesn't always translate into high-level mixed martial arts based grappling. If it did, every single division would be full of NCAA level wrestlers or Olympic level wrestlers, and while we do have some of those in the UFC, obviously guys like Alex Pereira would never be able to be a champion if, you know, fighters that came from Suarez's background dominated the sport. So MMA grappling, very different to traditional grappling, and we'll talk a lot about the nuances of that and what it means to the context of this fight as we go through it. Now, I think this fight is going to obviously be decided by whether or not Suarez can get the fight to the ground and keep the fight on the ground. And so a big part of, you know, my analysis, my breakdown for this fight, how I'm approaching it from a betting point of view, is going to be, can Suarez get the takedowns, keep the fight on the ground for long enough to take away Zhang's pretty significant advantage on the feet. I think we can all agree, no matter who we think is going to win this fight, I think we can all agree that if the fight stays standing, Zhang is going to absolutely cruise. Suarez has nothing for Zhang on the feet. She's not particularly good defensively, doesn't like to get hit, doesn't like to engage, doesn't have any power in her hands at all. Zhang is an absolute tank. She's not the best defensively. She does slow and get sloppier as fights wear on, but she hits very hard. True legit knockout power, reasonably technical, mean, nasty, devastating, heavy kicks to the leg and the body, and Zhang's pretty nasty on the feet. She's got a huge advantage there. So our main focus in this breakdown is going to be grappling and who's going to win the battle when it comes to grappling, because obviously on paper Zhang is nowhere near the level of Suarez, but fights aren't fought on paper, they're fought in the octagon, and you know, that makes things very interesting. So in terms of how I see these two from a grappling point of view, in these breakdowns, in our analysis in the live betting group, we often talk about physicality, and physicality is important in mixed martial arts, but it's even more important in women's MMA. And for whatever reason, quite often, it doesn't matter who the more technically skilled fighter is. A lot of the time in women's MMA, just being more physically imposing, stronger, more athletic, it goes a long way. And when you look at the body types of these two, their athleticism and their physicality, Tatiana Suarez is quite slight, she's quite feminine, she's quite lean, whereas Weili Zhang, absolute tank, very muscular, very physically imposing, and has an abundance of that physicality, which we know is so important in women's MMA, and ultimately is the reason why Zhang is the champion of the division. Because if we're being brutally honest, Zhang definitely isn't the best grappler in the division, she definitely isn't the best striker, but she's reasonably good everywhere, you know, kind of just above average everywhere. But when you throw into the mix her toughness and her physicality, that well-roundedness really makes her a very difficult proposition to deal with, because she can hang with everyone everywhere, right? She can hang with someone like Ioana Jędrzejczyk or Rose Namajunas on the feet, who are very high-level strikers, because that physicality closes that technical skill gap. And then she can hang on the ground with wrestlers like Tatiana Suarez, Carla Esparza, because again, that physicality is a great equalizer. And so what's very interesting about this fight is Zhang, from a technical point of view, cannot compete with Suarez. She's just nowhere near her level. Zhang's quite a low-level grappler, and I know there will be people rushing to the comment section to remind me all the wins on paper that Zhang has over different girls where she's used grappling, and you know, all the positions she's won and looked great in on the ground against certain opponents. But ultimately, her physicality allows her to get away with a lot of bad technique and make a lot of mistakes, because she's just strong enough to kind of bull through it and get away with it. But from a technical point of view, Zhang, pretty damn low level on the ground. And what you also notice about Zhang is that she burns through a lot of energy when grappling, because she does rely a lot on that physicality. It's not done with the best technique. This is the reason why you'll often find Zhang slows down a lot in fights where there's a lot of grappling. If you look at her fight against Zhao Ningyan, for example, in the second half of that fight, she was very tired because she grappled a lot. And so what's interesting about this matchup is Zhang is potentially in a lot of trouble on the ground against Suarez, because Suarez is just a much higher level grappler. But I do think Zhang's physicality can make life difficult for Suarez, because what I notice about Suarez is that while she's a very high level grappler from a technical point of view, she is, I choose my words very carefully here because I'm always taken out of context. People take what I say too literally. She is, I don't want to say unathletic, because that is a horrible thing to say and it can be taken out of context. Suarez lacks physicality on a level which is very rare for someone with her background at this level. Suarez might be one of the, and I don't want to use the word weakest, but she might be one of the weakest fighters in the division. She gets away with it because of very high level technique. And when I talk like this, people think I'm crazy, which is why I always show you footage to back this up. And I'm going to show you some video clips in a moment where you can actually see the lack of physicality to Suarez's grappling. And that's where this fight gets so interesting, because with Zhang, you have a low-level grappler with top-tier physicality, and with Suarez, you have top-tier grappling with low-level physicality. So they're kind of the opposite of one another. It's going to be very interesting to see who comes out on top, and that's why this fight is so good from a live betting point of view, where I'm very confident we're going to be able to make money on this one, because we know so much about the strengths and weaknesses of both girls, that when the fight starts, we're going to have a huge edge. But pre-fight is very risky, because we don't know whether Suarez's technique or Zhang's physicality is going to be the difference between these two. What we do know is that physicality is often the difference. It often is the deciding factor in women's MMA fights, but not always. Remember, trends are just trends. They don't play out 100% of the time. That's just the most likely outcome. I guess with both girls being in even money odds range, if we know physicality is usually the difference, you're better off going with Zhang here, betting with that trend in your favour, but it's risky. It's not a super strong position to put your money. So where do we begin with this one? So there's two huge issues with this fight. The first issue being Zhang's very low level on the ground, has bad takedown defense. The second issue being Suarez lacks physicality. So what we're going to do, we're going to show you the easiest thing to tick off our list, which is going to be Zhang's terrible takedown defense, which is obviously an issue when you're facing an Olympic level wrestler like Tatiana Suarez. So the problem with one of the main problems with capping this fight, trying to predict the outcome accurately, is it's been a long time since we saw Zhang fight a wrestler. Zhao Yang, striker. Amanda Lemos, striker. Carla Esparza is a wrestler, but she didn't try that hard to take Zhang down. Joanna Jędrzejczyk, striker. So the last time we got a good look at Zhang's grappling was all the way back in 2021. So, 4 years ago now. It's a long time. And we know for a fact Zhang has improved a lot in the last 4 years. Zhang has made exponential improvements to her takedown offense, her ground game, her offensive wrestling in the last 4 years. So the footage I'm about to show you might not mean anything, because Zhang's likely improved a lot from what I'm about to show you. But at the end of the day, all we can do is make the best decision possible with the information we've got available, and this is all we've got available to us. And so before that, Jędrzejczyk striker, Andrade striker, Pennington striker, Aguilar striker, Danielle Taylor striker. We really haven't seen Zhang face a high-level wrestler, in fact any kind of wrestler in the UFC other than Esparza, and by then I think Esparza was already kind of mentally beaten and 1 foot out the door. That's a story for another day, don't want to digress. Essentially we don't know a lot about Zhang's defensive wrestling, but what we have seen isn't good. So in this fight we don't see a ton of takedown offense from Zhang, because Namajunas is a striker and obviously doesn't shoot many takedowns. So we're just going to skip through. We're obviously going to just skim over Zhang's wrestling, because we know she's a tank. We know she's very physically imposing. If she gets on top of Suarez, she can likely control her for a bit and beat her up. But fundamentally, what we're trying to do here is establish, you know, what Zhang's chances are of defending herself from Suarez's grappling, because we know she's got a huge advantage on the feet. So we'll keep going. And like I say, there's not much in this fight. There's not much in this fight, but what we do have to work with speaks volumes. So here you can see 36 seconds left to go in round 2. Zhang gives up a very cheap takedown. Rose just hits a nice outside trip. Zhang goes down easily. You know, at the end of the day, don't want to be too harsh on Zhang for that. Rose is a striker. Zhang wouldn't have been expecting it because Rose didn't try to take her down, you know, in the 9 minutes leading up to that takedown attempt. So Rose had the element of surprise on her side, hit a nice outside trip. It was the end of the round, so Zhang's probably not going to try super hard to work her way back up to her feet. We're not going to hold that against Zhang. It's all gravy, baby. We'll keep going. Into round 3. Into round 3. So again, there's not much grappling in this fight, but what we do have speaks volumes. There's a little bit here, a little bit of a takedown from Zhang. Nothing major. Into round 4. And this really is all we've got to work with in terms of Zhang's defensive wrestling. So here she gets overly aggressive on a back take. And Rose pivots into her, reverses, winds up on top. So this isn't interesting for looking at Zhang's takedown defense. But what it is interesting and useful for is gauging what Zhang's like off her back. And it's not good news. Here we can see there's 2.5 minutes left to go in the round. So plenty of time for Zhang to work her way back up to her feet. Granted, she's in a difficult position because she's nowhere near the cage. So she hasn't got the cage to use as a tool to wall walk. But if we just skim through, we can see Zhang just stays in the closed guard. She's a little bit active off her back, but doesn't do a whole lot. And we can see Rose easily holds her down for 2.5 minutes. So this is a big concern because we know Suarez has a tendency to slow down as fights wear on. And what that shows me is if Suarez is able to get into top position and Zhang hasn't improved her ability to work her way back up to her feet much in the last 4 years, which she probably has, but all we can do is make the best decision with the information we've got available. What this says to me is if Suarez does get takedowns, she's going to be able to hold Zhang down pretty easily without having to exert too much energy. But we will keep going. And you can see Zhang gives up a very cheap outside trip there. So now there's 3.5 minutes left to go in the round. And again, Rose just kind of holds her down pretty easily. Beats her up from top position. And spends the entire remainder of the round in the top position beating Zhang up. So she spends 3.5 minutes in top position. Holding Zhang down and controlling her easily. So obviously this is super interesting. Because we've seen Zhang give up, you know, 2 cheap takedowns in that fight. Spend a lot of time on the bottom without really showing too much urgency to work her way back up to her feet. Red flag city, if you ask me personally. It's not good. Zhang looks very bad on the ground. But there are issues with Tatiana as well, which we will show you now. And they mainly stem from a lack of physicality. Now, the problem with trying to illustrate a lack of physicality is that it has to just be generally something you pick up on from a decade of watching the sport. It's just a vibe, it's just a sense, it's just a feeling you get, which is where our edge comes from betting on this sport. We got that high level knowledge that's very difficult to acquire without putting in thousands of hours of work watching fights. But with Suarez, there's just a vibe. She badly lacks physicality. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to try my best to show you what I mean. It won't be the clearest, it won't be the easiest thing for you to see, because ultimately, if someone's got bad takedown defense, you can just show it. If someone lacks physicality, it's a bit harder. But what I'm going to do is show you some clips of Suarez working for takedowns against different girls, and then hopefully you'll see what I mean. So here she is working for a takedown up against the cage against Andrade. Now, what I want you to pay attention to, whether we're showing footage of Jessica Andrade or Montana De La Rosa or Nina Nunes, is how easily all 3 girls deal with Suarez in the clinch. If we think about a very physically imposing fighter, in the clinch, they're able to move their opponents around very easily. They're able to do whatever they want to them. They're able to pin them up against the cage. And their opponent, when they've got their back up against the cage and they're defending the takedown, isn't able to do a lot. They're kind of trapped. With Suarez, she just looks physically weak. So here you can see her working for a takedown. Look at how comfortable Andrade is. She gets these underhooks and she just moves Suarez around easily. Now, granted, when we talk about physicality, Andrade is on the upper end of the physicality scale, right? She's up there with Weili Zhang. So this isn't the best example, but I'm showing you a range of positions against a range of opponents. And of course, Montana De La Rosa, Nina Ansaroff, they're on the weaker end of the scale when it comes to physicality. And I'm going to show you footage of those girls next, so that you can see exactly where I'm coming from. And I think we're done with this fight, actually. I think Suarez just gets a submission from here. She does. Okay, so Andrade is very physically imposing. So it's not conclusive when you see Suarez looking weak in that clinch position against someone like Andrade. Maybe we're being a little bit harsh. But it is worth noting, I personally believe Weili Zhang is a lot more physically imposing than Andrade is. So if Andrade can easily deal with Suarez in the clinch like that, reasonably good chance Zhang can as well. But it's fair to say, earlier on in the breakdown video, we described Tatiana Suarez as being very slight, very lean, very feminine. She's a very feminine looking girl, feminine looking body, and those kind of girls typically struggle against the tanky, super mutant kind of bodybuilder type fighters like Weili Zhang. But I think it's even fairer to say, call me crazy, I think Montana De La Rosa is even more slight and even more feminine than Suarez, because Suarez has got a lifetime of Olympic level wrestling. Montana De La Rosa doesn't. She had a child in her early 20s, got into mixed martial arts because her husband was a fighter, all that kind of stuff. But point being, De La Rosa is even more feminine. She's even further away from the body type of Weili Zhang. And so, if Suarez is looking physically weak in positions against someone like Montana De La Rosa, that's a huge, huge, huge red flag. So what we're going to do is pay attention to a lot of the clinch work here, and you will get to see the lack of physicality firsthand. I mean, straight away you can see Montana De La Rosa kind of muscling her around in the clinch, which, you know, if Montana De La Rosa can do that, imagine what a fucking super mutant from China that's probably sticking fucking bull testosterone into her eyeballs. Imagine what she can do. But anyway, this is a position where you really get to see the lack of physicality in Suarez's game. There we go. Okay, so look again. Suarez, you can see, is kind of throwing herself at De La Rosa, and she's trying to impose herself in the clinch, but look at how comfortable De La Rosa is here. She's got that underhook on the left side. She's quite comfortable. Suarez can't get in on the legs, and you can see, look at how hard Suarez is trying. You can see by how she's bending her knees and she's really committing to this. There's just a big lack of physicality. De La Rosa looks so comfortable here as Suarez is working for. We also get a nip slip there. It's very fortunate De La Rosa got away with that one. That's one of the closest nip slips I've seen while researching fights. That was millimeters in that. But anyway, Suarez eventually kind of drags her to the ground off that single leg, but De La Rosa decides to pull guard, which is obviously not the best decision. Anyway, De La Rosa works her way back up to her feet. And again, in this clinch position now, you get to see that lack of physicality come into play again. So from this camera angle, again, you can see Suarez really trying to impose herself on De La Rosa, really working hard with this takedown. De La Rosa just gets that underhook again on the left side. She's very, very comfortable here. Absolutely no problem. She's just chilling. And you can just, Suarez is just giving off vibes that she's very weak here. And I'm just kind of visualizing the scale of physicality when you compare someone like Montana De La Rosa to Weili Zhang, and how much stronger Zhang's going to be in these positions. Yes, obviously, if you shoot in on Zhang's legs, as we've seen in the Rose Namajunas fight, she does seem very susceptible to inside-outside trips. And then from there, obviously, she looks very weak off her back. But look at how hard Suarez is committing to this takedown. Look how weak she looks here. I mean, look how comfortable De La Rosa is. And like I say, if you haven't been watching the sport very long, or you don't understand MMA on a deep level, that's not a criticism. That's not a dig. Ultimately, we watch sports for entertainment, right? I understand this stuff might not be easy for everyone to identify or spot. But I've been watching mixed martial arts for 20 years. I've been betting on the sport for 15 years. And I've made a profit every single year that I've been doing this for the last 15 years. And I can tell you, it is screaming out the screen at me right now that Suarez badly lacks physicality. And while it's far easier for me to just show you someone like Zhang and say, look, she's very weak off her back, because when she's taken down, she does nothing to get back up to her feet. We can all see that. Someone that's been watching MMA for a week can I understand what I'm trying to say there. But when it comes to a lack of physicality, a little bit more difficult to spot. But hopefully you get my point. Hopefully you get my point. Anyway, into round 2. Same story, really. Both girls get to the clinch pretty quickly. Suarez drives De La Rosa into the cage, but it's not easy for her. You see De La Rosa resisting. De La Rosa looking pretty comfortable here. And the next fight I'm going to show you is even more interesting, because De La Rosa is actually a wrestler. So even though she's not the level of wrestler, I mean, look at the problems that Suarez is having here. She hits like some mad Paige Van Zandt head and arm throw, and De La Rosa's back up to her feet. But anyway, what's even crazier about the next fight I'm going to show you is, like, De La Rosa is actually a wrestler. So okay, she's comfortable in these positions, but when Suarez fights Nina Ansaroff, or Nina Nunes, she's now known by, it was Ansaroff back when they fought. Ansaroff / Nunes, she's got a base in Taekwondo. So when she's very comfortable in these grappling positions and making Suarez look like she lacks physicality, like, that's the real red flag for me. Like, that is the real red flag for me. And where things do get super duper interesting. And that's the fight we're going to watch now. So this is Nina Nunes, Nina Ansaroff, depending on what timeline we're going off. Here she is, Amanda Nunes' wife. But anyway, this is a great fight for illustrating the lack of physicality in Suarez's game, because the naysayers, when I play footage of the Jessica Andrade fight, will be like, well, that's unfair because Andrade is a tank, she's really physically imposing too. And then the naysayers in the De La Rosa fight might be like, well, De La Rosa's a wrestler, so that's why Suarez was struggling. Ansaroff's got the ankle wraps on, man. She's very slight, she's very feminine as well. She's not tanky like a Jessica Andrade or a Weili Zhang. She's very slight, very feminine herself. And she's a striker. She's got a base in Taekwondo, hence the ankle wraps. And so if you lack physicality in grappling positions against Ansaroff, who actually does have terrible takedown offense, you wouldn't know it if you looked at this fight. Well, that's a bit of a red flag to me. And so straight away in these positions, and again, I don't want to make this breakdown super long, but it's kind of going to be in it. It's kind of going to be by the time we get through this. Anyway, Suarez gets a takedown. But again, Ansaroff pops back up pretty easily. But again, in this position, for me, Suarez just very easy to move around, very easy to get underhooks on, very easy to neutralize the threat of a wrestling. Whenever you see a fighter drop to her knees this early in a fight, it's a bad sign. Usually, when a fighter drops their knees, it's because they don't really have the energy or drive to shoot in properly. And you can see Suarez is on her knees a lot in this first round, which is a big red flag. Eventually she gets a takedown, hunky-dory, all fun and games, well done. But again, big lack of physicality, and she had to go to her knees to get that, which is not good. When you go to your knees, you obviously put yourself in a vulnerable position to eat a lot of elbows, potentially be flattened out on your back, all that kind of stuff. But again, in this position, the clinch is really telling. When Suarez is in on the legs, you can really see her lack of physicality. It's glaringly obvious. My stream buffers. Gets a takedown. She's back up. And this is something else you notice, right? Ansaroff historically was very, very weak off her back. But yet she was able to find ways back up to her feet against Suarez, which would be another big red flag for me if I were on Suarez this weekend, which I most definitely am not. Like I say, I don't want to make these breakdowns super long, but we'll let it sink in so it becomes glaringly obvious for the naysayers. So obvious it'll punch you in the face, and there'll still be some people telling me I'm wrong and I have no idea what I'm talking about. But the footage doesn't lie. That's what I like to say. The only place you'll find truth and honesty is in the fight footage, but very few people actually take the time to research the fights they bet on. But when you do, glaringly obvious. It shows you what is true. It answers all the questions. So yeah, it's an interesting fight. We'll leave it there, I think. There's a good amount of footage there for you to see what is true. So, to summarise everything that we've spoken about, everything we've seen in that footage, obviously Zhang's takedown offence 4 years ago looked dreadful. She looked extremely weak off her back. We don't know where she's at in 2025. She's barely fought any wrestlers in the UFC. In terms of wrestling, this is a big step up in competition for her this weekend. Suarez, from a technical point of view, very high level MMA grappler. However, will Zhang be able to just kind of neutralise the threat of Suarez's grappling with her physicality? Will she be able to quickly get back up to her feet if she gets taken down? Because the thing about Zhang is, even though she looked awful on her back against Rose, that fight was 4 years ago. And what we do know about physically imposing fighters is that when they learn how to get back up to their feet, they can be very difficult to hold down. So this could be one of those fights where if Zhang does get taken down, she's just learned to stand right back up. And the thing is, Suarez's top game doesn't look that heavy. When you've got fighters like Ansaroff, you know, fighters like De La Rosa easily working their way back up to their feet, you know, 30 seconds to a minute after being taken down, it's trouble. It is trouble for Suarez. So, in terms of how I see this fight from a betting point of view, personally, these type of fights are bread and butter. These are the type of fights we've got a huge edge on. These are the type of fights we tend to do very well when we live bet. So for me personally, I don't feel the need to gamble pre-fight on a matchup like this, because I don't know whether Suarez's physicality is going to cause, whether Zhang's physicality is going to cause Suarez a problem. And I don't know if Zhang's improved her takedown offense and ground game. What I do know is if Zhang looks like she did against Rose back in 2021, it's probably going to be a pretty easy fight for Suarez. But while we haven't seen improvements to Zhang's defensive wrestling and how she looks off her back, because no one's really tested her in that department, we know Zhang's offensive wrestling has improved exponentially since 2021. Naturally, if you improve offensively, you're also very likely to improve defensively. So I would expect some pretty big improvements from Zhang this weekend compared to how she looked against Rose, especially because Tatiana is a very easy fighter to game plan for. You know, she's not easy to deal with, but she's easy to game plan for in the sense that you know exactly what she's going to do. It's the same with Carla Esparza. Carla's not always the easiest to stop, but there's no surprises with Carla. You know exactly what she's going to do because she doesn't have the striking to mix things up. Zhang will know what to expect from Suarez. Therefore, Suarez won't have the element of surprise on her side. She doesn't have the striking to set up her takedowns. And so, if Zhang's prepared well for this fight, could be a difficult night for Suarez. That's why I'm going to lean towards Zhang, but I'm going to save this one for live betting. In terms of the over-under, I would be very surprised, actually, if this fight went to a decision. And I'm probably going to bet on the fight not to go to a decision. The reason why I don't think this fight will go to a decision is because I see one of three outcomes here. I see Suarez being too high level on the ground for Zhang and submitting Zhang. We know that Suarez does have that killer instinct. She does go for the submission. She does go for a lot of chokes on the ground. And she's got those long, skinny arms to be able to get those chokes. Suarez, very, very dangerous on the ground. But the other two scenarios I see playing out is both these girls do tend to slow as fights wear on. So if Suarez slows, she could be too tired to get the takedown, too tired to defend herself on the feet. Then that opens the door for Zhang to get a knockout. And then if Zhang slows down, that makes it easier for Suarez to get the takedowns, easier for her to get the chokes. So that's another scenario in which I think this fight ends inside the distance. The third scenario where I think this fight could end inside the distance is Suarez can't get the fight to the ground. I don't think she's going to be able to survive 25 minutes on the feet with Zhang. I think Zhang will just knock her out. I think she'll turn her into a panic wrestler and knock her out. So I do like fight doesn't go to a decision at 1.67. I quite like that. I'm going to be betting that for sure. I think that's a pretty good bet this weekend. And it's something I think you should do your own research on and strongly consider betting. If I were you, I would strongly consider that one. So, in terms of prop bets, most likely outcomes, I think most likely outcome is actually Zhang by knockout or TKO, but the odds are terrible. Suarez submission, odds are terrible. Yeah, I would just stick to fight doesn't go to a decision. And I hope you found that breakdown useful. Now it's time for us to move on to the next one. Now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Teixeira versus Justin Tafa. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Teixeira is the slight favourite at average odds of about 1.74, which is going to be minus 135 for an implied probability of 57%. We take a look at the odds on Tafa, he's around an average of 2.15, which is going to be plus 115 for an implied probability of 47%. Though Teixeira is 25 years old, 6'7" with an 83-inch reach. Tafa, 31 years old, 6 foot tall with a 74-inch reach. So that's a massive 9-inch reach advantage for Teixeira, as well as being a lot taller. And we know that fighters that have a 9-inch reach advantage do win around 70% of the time, which is a huge trend, a huge statistical advantage in Teixeira's favour. And of course, if you were to just blind bet guys with a 9-inch reach advantage in this odds range over the long term, knowing that fighters with a 9-inch reach advantage win around 70% of the time, that would give you a nice 9-inch margin over the betting sites, which is obviously very, more than 9-inch, sorry. 13-inch margin, 13% margin over the bookies based on the implied probability. So if you were to just blind bet that statistic, this could be a bet you'd want to go in on Teixeira. But in terms of how they match up stylistically, in terms of what we know about both guys, this is an easy pass for me. Teixeira is just one of those guys where we don't really know anything about him. If you look at his record, every single one of his fights ended in the first round. Most of them have been stand-up fights that have ended via quick knockout. So we don't know anything about his cardio, anything about his ground game. He is basically a complete unknown. He's a tall, lanky, slow, stiff fighter with bad defense and doesn't seem crazy dangerous offensively either. Tafa is certainly going to be a lot faster here. But obviously that size, that length, that reach will enable Teixeira to stay. Not to say will enable him to stay outside of a range where he can be hit, but it will be harder for Tafa to get inside and land on someone as big and long and tall as Teixeira. So yeah, this guy's a complete unknown. We know a lot more about Tafa. We know he has no takedown offense and no ground game. We don't know if that's going to matter in this fight because we've not seen any grappling from Teixeira. He doesn't try to take guys down. He likes to stand and bang. So it's possible Teixeira could just come out, take Tafa down, dominate him on the ground. But we don't know how likely that is because Teixeira's never done that before. In terms of how they match up on the feet, Tafa by far the better striker in my opinion. Faster, bigger power, more technical, better defensively, covers distance, much quicker, much more athletic. And if the fight stays standing, I do actually favour Tafa. I know Teixeira's got that huge reach, that huge trend in his favour, but he's one of these big, slow, stuck in the mud heavyweights that's very bad defensively. And with how fast Tafa covers distance, how hard he hits, how accurate he is, if you're not quick enough to stick and move and slip shots and get out the way of Tafa when he blitzes forward, good chance you're going to get knocked out when you fight him. And Teixeira is the kind of guy that will get knocked out against a guy like Tafa. So based on past performances, my lean's definitely Tafa here. But due to a lack of footage on Teixeira and we don't really know what to get from him, this one's an easy pass. In terms of the over-under, with both guys liking to stand and bang, them both being dangerous on the feet, obviously you know, it does say that the odds do say that the fight's very likely not to go to a decision, but the odds were also similar on the Pavlovich versus Rosenstrike fight last weekend. And if you watch my breakdown video for that fight, you'll know that, you know, I was saying, you know, no one's expecting a fight like this to go to a decision. Might be worth sprinkling a little bit on the decision. I know some of you did. I know Jedi did. He DM'd me about that, you know, earlier in the week, saying that he had the idea to do it off the breakdown video. Like, I'm not saying this one's going to go to a decision, but what I am saying is fights like this, where both guys may show each other a lot of respect, sometimes do go to a decision. And, you know, if you let the odds do the work for you, 5.0 plus 400, it's a lot more attractive than betting on fight not to go to decision. Now, I did like it with the Pavlovich-Rosenstrike fight just because of how good defensively Rosenstrike is. He's not easy to get out there. He's not easy to put away. I like it far less on this fight because, like I say, Teixeira looks slow, flat-footed, stuck in the mud. But you never know. Crazier things have happened. The odds are very attractive. Most likely outcome, in my opinion, is Tafa by knockout at TKO, but the odds are absolutely terrible. So props are a little bit dead on that fight. I hope you found that breakdown useful. Now let's move on to the next one. Alright, now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Rodolfo Bellato versus Jimmy Crute. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Bellato is the favourite at average odds of about 1.62, which is going to be minus 161 for an implied probability of 62%. If we take a look at the odds on Crute, he's around an average of, say, 2.30, which is going to be plus 130 for an implied probability of 43%. So Bellato is 29 years old, 6'3", with a 77.5-inch reach. Crute, 28 years old, 6'2", with a 74-inch reach. So both guys about the same size. Bellato with a bit of a reach advantage, nothing major. Both guys about the same age as well. It's a very interesting fight, this. This is one of the most interesting fights on the card. So, Crute, there's a huge red flag with Crute, and the red flag is that he actually retired after his last fight against Alonzo Menefield. He did the whole thing where he took his gloves off in the octagon, laid them down, he was done. He's now coming back 2 years later, or a year and a half later, and usually when a fighter retires, or they even mention the word retirement, after that their career falls off a cliff, because what that says is no matter how old they are, no matter what stage of their career they're in, it means mentally they don't have their head fully in the game. Like if you go to someone like, you know, Jiri Prohaska, every single strand of DNA in his body is dedicated to fighting, and in order to compete with the best guys in the world, compete at the highest level of the sport, that's the way you need to be. And the fact that Crute retired against Menefield is a sign that he isn't where he needs to be mentally to compete with the best in the world. Is Bellato the best in the world though? Crute's obviously lost his last 4 fights, but is Crute on the level, is Bellato on the level of these guys, right? Menefield very well rounded, you know, difficult style to deal with everywhere. Hill's just fought for a title and in a title elimination bout. You know, Anthony Smith's not great, but he's a lot better back in 2021, 4 years ago. So Crute's been losing to top guys, and, you know, perhaps he'll look a lot better against someone closer to his level like Bellato. So what I would say is, this is a very good stylistic matchup for Crute, and I do think it's quite likely Crute wins this. And while there's not many moneyline bets which have tempted me on this card, of course we've got fight doesn't go to decision in the Suarez Zhang fight, but in terms of moneyline bets, there's not a whole lot that has tempted me. Crute, probably the most tempted I've been to pull the trigger on a moneyline bet. I may still bet him. I want to see him at the weigh-ins, give this some thought. So, reason why I like Crute in this fight is, first of all, because he's got home advantage. This card's obviously taking place in Australia. He's Australian, and we know that if a fight is close in Australia between an Australian and a non-Australian, the judge is far more likely to give the Australian the nod. So this is one of those fights where if Bellato wants to win this, he's going to have to either finish Crute, which is very unlikely because Bellato isn't a finisher, and Crute is absolutely tough as nails. I know he has been finished a few times, but he's been finished in ways that Bellato can't really threaten him. And if Bellato doesn't get the finish, he's obviously going to need to win by decision, which means against an Australian in Australia, he's really going to have to put it on Crute and win rounds beyond all reasonable doubt. And Bellato's not really that kind of guy. He likes to hug it out in the clinch. He's a grinder, doesn't really do much damage. He's kind of passive, not the most aggressive fighter. So it is going to be difficult for Bellato to win a decision here. Crute isn't the most technical striker, but he does hit hard, he does inflict damage. He is bad defensively, his footwork's a bit dodgy, but Bellato's not at all dangerous on the feet. He doesn't have power in his hands, he's not a particularly dangerous striker, he doesn't move particularly well. This guy's like a wet blanket kind of grinder. And what's interesting about Bellato is in his past fights, all he tends to really try and do is grab a hold of his opponents, drive him in the cage, beat him up in the clinch, but not particularly effective. It doesn't do a lot of damage, not particularly physically imposing. Crute's takedown defense is bad, striking defense is bad. There's opportunities for Bellato to win this, but I think Crute lands the harder, more impactful shots. He's a better offensive wrestler, and something that really stood out to me about Bellato in his past fights is that he is quite weak off his back for a BJJ guy. If you take him down, he kind of just lies on his back and doesn't do a lot. And if you watch Crute's fights, Crute's got really nice timing on his double leg takedown entries. His offensive wrestling's pretty good. Now, Crute does slow down a lot as fights wear on. One area where Bellato's got a clear advantage is cardio. Bellato's cardio is very good. In fact, he actually weathered an early storm against Teixeira and kind of used his cardio to drag Teixeira into deep waters and got the job done towards the end of round 2. Crute does fade in fights, but Crute is one of those guys that because he does have such a big heart and a strong will to win, and he is scrappy and tough and he's got no quit in him, and because he gets tired in every fight, fighting tired's kind of in his comfort zone, and he will push through tiredness and fight hard to compete and hang in there. So I just think it's a good fight for Crute. He's got home advantage on his side. Aside from cardio, Bellato doesn't really do anything better than Crute. Bellato's very generic, average, nothing special. He's industrious for sure, but aside from decent cardio, it's not like he poses a threat to Crute on the feet. Grappling's not particularly good. Decent fight for Crute this. In terms of the over-under, very likely this fight goes deep in my opinion, so I do like the over 1.5 rounds on this a lot, mainly because Bellato is not that dangerous. He does have a lot of quick finishes on his record, but this is because he's fought a very low level of opponent. If you look at the guys he's been finishing, pretty low level across the board. Crute's a tough fucker, not easy to get out of there. I think the odds on this one are pretty generous on over 1.5 rounds because both guys very, very rarely go deep in fights. A lot of their fights end very quick, but styles make fights, and when you put the two styles together, they're both tough, they're both well-rounded. Neither are crazy dangerous. I think it's quite likely this one hits the over 1.5 rounds. There's a second bet there. We've got fight doesn't go to a decision on Suarez Zhang. Over 1.5 rounds on this fight. I quite like that. Most likely outcome, I would go Crute by decision. Odds of 4.0 plus 300 for the props. If you want to sprinkle a little bit of money on this fight to make watching it more interesting, that is a prop that I would consider if I were you. So I hope you found that useful. Now let's move on to the next one. Now let's break down the fight between Jake Matthews and Francisco Prado. Now, when I first started researching this card and I scanned through all the matchups this weekend, Prado was the first name that jumped out at me as a potential bet, and I was quite surprised to see him as a big underdog because from memory, Prado is one of these tough, aggressive pressure fighters with no quit in them, and those are typically the kind of guys that Matthew has struggled against in the past. However, after researching this fight, I do actually think this is a difficult matchup for Prado, and I completely changed my opinion on it, and now I understand why Matthews is such a big favourite. So he's around 1.44, which is going to be minus 227 for an implied probability of 69%. If you take a look at the odds on Prado, he is around an average of, say, call it 2.80, which is going to be plus 180 for an implied probability of 36%. So Matthews is 30 years old, 5'11", with a 73-inch reach. Prado, 22 years old, 5'10", with a 69-inch reach. So nice little reach advantage there for Matthews, and to be fair, he does know how to use it. He's a decent counter striker. We can also see a big age gap, although in the context of this fight, even though Prado's 8 years younger, I think that hurts Prado because he's very green, very young, very inexperienced. Matthews far more experienced. The other X factor we've got to mention is that Matthews will have home advantage on his side. He's going to have the crowd behind him. It's the first fight of the main card, so the arena's going to be full. They're going to be bang up for this. They're going to be right behind Matthews, and he is the kind of guy that does feed off the energy of the crowd. Home advantage going to be big in this one. Very difficult for Prado to win a decision against Matthews in Australia. And like I said, with the Bellato versus Jimmy Crute fight, you know, if Prado wants to win this, he's got to get a finish. Typically, he's not a finisher. If we look at his record, yes, he's got a lot of finishes outside the UFC against a low level of opponent, but as soon as he comes into the UFC, he starts going to a decision against guys like Malarkey, guys like Zellhuber. If he's not able to finish Jake, which I don't think he's going to be able to, you would have to outwork him and win a decision, which again isn't going to be easy against an Australian in Australia. So the reason why I like Jake Matthews in this fight is because Prado is very one-dimensional. He kind of just plods forward, looks to put a lot of pressure on his opponents and box them up. He never shoots takedowns, doesn't really throw many kicks. He just zombies forward, and while he is very tough, he is very durable. He is an easy fighter to game plan for. Matthews is one of these guys that likes to counter strike. He likes to bounce around on the outside, chip away at you with his punches and kicks from the outside. He's got good leg kicks, good body kicks, decent boxing, good counter striking. And Prado's the kind of guy that will play into his hands. Prado's the kind of guy that will just plod forward and block punches with his face. And that gives Matthews the opportunity to pick him off, counter striking from the outside, play the role of Matador. Matthews also mixes up his striking and grappling. He's got good reactive double leg takedowns. He might take Prado down in this fight. Matthews' takedown defense isn't the best, but Prado never shoots takedowns, so I don't think that's going to be an issue. And yeah, this is one of those fights where I just think Matthews is going to bounce around on the outside, counter strike, inflict more damage, win pretty comfortably, and you know, not run into too much trouble. The one area Matthews could struggle is with Prado's relentlessness, because Matthews has slowed under pressure in the past. However, Prado tends to slow his fights wear on as well, so it's not like in the second half of the fight his pressure is super relentless and difficult to deal with. He does fade, and when he fades he becomes even easier to hit, and obviously, you know, he's got far less pop on his shots when he gets tired, and so his pressure fighting style that he brings isn't as difficult or as scary to deal with in the second half of the fight as it is in the first. So Matthews should be fine. He should get the job done here. I don't like his odds. I think 1.44 is too steep of a price to pay on someone like Matthews, just because he has been known to slow down under pressure in the past, and Prado will be putting him under pressure. This is not the kind of bet that I like to place. In order for me to bet a guy in this odds range, I have to perceive them to have virtually no way to lose. That's not the case here, but I still think Matthews gets the job done. It's just I think the odds are roughly where they should be, so there's no value here for me. In terms of the over-under, very likely this fight goes deep in my opinion. Prado is very tough, very well-rounded. He's gone to a decision in 2 of his last 3 now that he's facing a step-up in competition in the UFC. You can see that on the quiet, Jake is a bit of a decision-ater, with the majority of his fights over the last 5-6 years going to a decision or deep into the fight. This one went to the 3rd round. So yeah, very likely this one goes deep as well. The odds reflect that though, with it being relatively steep favourite odds on the over 2.5 rounds. In terms of the prop bets for this one, in terms of the props, Matthews by decision is the only prop I would consider, but the odds are steep on that, and that isn't something that I would be betting. So I hope you found that breakdown useful. I hope you found all these breakdowns useful, and I hope you can use this information in this video to make better betting decisions, maybe even earn some extra cash. I'll be back next week with another breakdown video. Don't forget to check out all the links in the description below to join our live betting group, as well as join our Discord, which is free. Join in the discussion. I look forward to seeing you there. So where you can get direct access to me, ask me questions about any upcoming fights or any specific questions you got about the fights this weekend. So nice one guys, take care, love you all. I'll see you all very soon. Take care, bye.